All right, ladies and gentlemen, moving swiftly to our next masterclass session, talking about striking a starboard management relationship. We're very pleased to have all the way from Australia our next speaker, Mr. Alan Blewitt, non-executive director, leadership mentor, independent consultant. Ladies and gentlemen, Alan, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is that loud enough? Yep, good. Ladies and gentlemen, three introductory observations, and I'm taking my cue from one of yesterday's chairmen that I'm not going to do all titles. I'm going to assume that we are a collection of professional individuals, so I will use short names when we get to questions later. And three observations. Yesterday, you will all know that there was a long and fairly heavy push to get more younger people on boards, more millennials. And when I have to tell you a personal quick story, because it actually is a good reason why you should have more millennials and not older people on boards. Because in 2 weeks' time, I have to have my left hip replaced. And I think one of the great benefits of millennials is they don't have to take time out to have their hip replaced. So that, just for those people who were in that session yesterday, add that to your pool of arguments. The second thing I should tell you about me is I have a predilection to tell stories, because I like telling stories about board life. So if you think there are too many stories and I should get back to the substance, the signal I expect from you is wind it up. And I'll get the signal. I'm very polite. I'll take notice of you. Now, the third thing is, why is this guy who's got a problem with his hip taking a physiotherapy band onto the stage? Well, I'm not going to tell you. But partway through the presentation, you will find out why that is an important symbol of good board management relationships. Wait, watch this space. We're on to the first slide. I've got it, that's right. Okay, why a masterclass? The obvious reason. We are expecting you to finish this session having a greater level of mastery over this very important issue of board management relationships. I also want to spend a bit of time talking about the cultural differences between boards in Australia, the UK, the US, and in Malaysia. Because the theory is that there are fundamental differences, and certainly from when I worked in Asia, I think that's true. And it's called the culture theory jungle, because there are so many academics who've written about it, and can we find a way through? But the most important thing, this is the heart of the session. For a true five-star relationship, what do directors, chairs, and CEOs think is important? What is it that they're looking for to create this mystical, magical five-star relationship? An important issue is, if you want to hold that relationship, you've got to solve conflicts professionally. And there is a special relationship between the CEO and the chair. It's not master-servant. It's not you do, I say and you do. And some people were saying yesterday that there's a bit of that in Malaysian boards. The chairmen think that they are the one who must be obeyed. Good board management relationships are not like that. And there's a case study which I am really interested to hear how you will react, because it is a dilemma for a chairman, for a board, and a CEO. And I want to hear how you would solve it, and then I'll tell you how it was solved in the real world, because this is based on a real life story. Okay, now before moving through this process, I want to give you a little bit of background on the context of being a company director in Australia right now. We have had an unprecedented level of scrutiny of governance behaviour, particularly in financial services. We've had major reviews of banks and financial service organisations, a royal commission into banking that the government resisted for about 3 years, and then they were forced to say yes, and the outcomes were fundamentally embarrassing for the banking sector in Australia, and embarrassing for the politicians who tried to ignore it. There are numerous changes underway which are impacting on directors, and not just directors in the big four banks, even down to not-for-profits and small mutual funds. They're all impacted by the outcomes from the Royal Commission. Board management relations that are too cosy or complacent will be called out. Regulators are demanding closer board scrutiny of corporate culture, going back to what we heard about just a minute ago, and remuneration practices. and they're insisting on greater accountability for the way that customers are treated. We had scandalous outputs from the Royal Commission in terms of insurance companies selling life insurance to utterly inappropriate people, like someone who was disabled and living in a care home was sold a life insurance policy over the phone. I mean, appalling behaviours. Several very, very high-profile CEOs have lost their job. The chairman of one of Australia's largest companies was forced to stand down. Fines have been issued, and the remediation costs for what happened to customers is now, 12 months after the Royal Commission, 10 billion Australian dollars has had to be paid back to customers. 10 billion. Can you imagine if that was in ringgit and happening in Malaysia? And remember, you've got a population roughly our size. So it has been like a tsunami of regulatory impact on the life of directors. And it is changing all the ground rules. I don't need to draw the obvious conclusion. The biggest casualty in the Australian corporate life has been trust in what directors and management do. It goes back to the theme of our conference. Now, I want to spend a few minutes looking at what I call the universe of directors' duties. Let's have a look at what's up here on the screen. Now, clearly, the most important thing is your fiduciary duty. And remember, you remember the courses you've done on fiduciary duty. It's all about putting your interests to others above your own interests, or the interests of the party that you represent on the board. That fiduciary duty concept is fundamental, but it's growing. We've got to act in good faith. We've got to act with care and diligence. The board has to establish the vision, mission and goals. We need to play a key role in the core values, as Patrick was talking about a few minutes ago. We have to avoid and declare conflicts of interest. We have to maintain and sign off accounts that have integrity, that are reputable, that we can defend. We don't misuse information for personal benefit. We disclose to the public and shareholders as soon as we are aware that there is something significant. That's a heavy set of responsibilities, but that's not all. The universe of directors' responsibilities is expanding, and now, well, we know good corporate governance, that's been in for a decade or more, but corporate social responsibility is no longer an option. Many of you will be discussing at your boards, how are we going to reflect corporate social responsibility in our company policy, in our behaviours? Remuneration practices in Australia and in North America under great scrutiny. Work health and safety, or occupational health and safety, which is the WHS. Anti-discrimination policies, whether it's towards women, whether it's towards disabled people, whether it's towards ethnic minorities, front and centre. And we're all dealing with this question of how will your board demonstrate to stakeholders that it is dealing with climate change impacts, that it is mitigating the impact of your business, particularly heavy impact on the fossil fuel and the extractive industries like BHP and Rio Tinto in Australia. So, this is reality. It's happening right now. The prime overarching issue, though, is fiduciary duty. And there are other things emerging almost daily. Cybersecurity is now top of the pops in Australia, and everyone is having to demonstrate that they're aware of that, because you are holding in your company databases information, data that is of enormous value to hackers and criminals. And you have to demonstrate your corporate social responsibility that you are protecting that data. Otherwise, almost certainly you will be criticised in the media, apart from the regulators. But underpinning all that, and you know it because you live and breathe this stuff, is we have directors' legal liability, and we have to make sure that the behaviours that we are engaging in, the activities of our company, are covered by our directors' legal liability. And as you know, the premiums are going up. And we've got regulator oversight, as I described earlier. Now, what about management? Well, management, it's relatively clear-cut. And I'm not saying that to be critical, but it's a fact. They are there to execute the strategy the board has agreed on, achieve their KPIs, run the operations efficiently and effectively, remain accountable. They've got the staffing and resourcing because the board has agreed with that when you accepted the business plan. They've got to achieve budget. They've got to prepare good business cases. Now, I had a debate with several directors yesterday about overly long business cases sent to the board. And we just had a protest at one of the boards that I'm on because the number of pages of the board papers hit 450. And the director said, stop. We're not doing this anymore. You've got to learn to write concise cases to put to us with a very clear recommendation and don't pad it out. Clear messages from board to management. They've got to inform the board when things start going wrong or there's some really good news. Either way. But one mantra that came out from management, directors, and particularly chairs was no surprises. So you've got to have a communication principle that you don't surprise each other. There is nothing more likely to undermine board trust in management than management surprise you on the downside. Oh, we forgot to mention that this factor actually was going to undermine the achievement of budget. Well, hang on a minute, why didn't you tell me that 6 weeks ago? No surprises. It's one of the little mantras that I think in the last couple of years it's risen to the top. And I've put an arrow down below, measured interaction with board and directors. And I'll come back to that. What do management want from the interaction with their directors? They have very clear expectations, as we do, but they do as well, and we need to satisfy both parts of the equation. Now, what I want to move on to now is a little bit of that, the cultural differences. I mean, if I walked into one of your board meetings in Malaysia tomorrow with my more Western style of being a company director, there would be different expectations. Let me try and explore a bit of this. And there is a jungle of theories out there. So, can I go back? Anyway, we'll leave that one up there for the minute because I want to give a Slido question because you've been sitting for too long. Now, two frequent dimensions of national cultural tendencies are the significance of, remember this, rules over relationships. So some countries say, we would prefer to govern using rules, others govern using relationships. Now, the rules-driven ones are, no surprises, UK, US, Canada, Australia, Germany, Scandinavia. That's the way they like to run their boards. The theory is that in Latin America and in Asia, relationships are more important. The rules might be a little flexible because the relationship has to continue. Now, in addition, another criterion is shared or centralised power. And the theory is that the northern countries, plus Australia, want centralised power. That is, the board controls. Whereas the theory is that in Malaysia, other Asian countries and Latin America, it's a bit more shared. And the chairman is often a bit paternalistic to make sure everyone's included. Some of the commentary yesterday was that the behaviour of chairmen in Malaysia is not necessarily paternalistic and bringing everyone with them. It's a little bit more directive, a bit more Western. So can we have the Slido question up, please? Which would be Slido question 2. I bypassed question 1. Can we have that on the screen? Have we got it? I can't see it. There it is. Okay, we do this one first. We've switched order slightly. Just take a quick vote on which of these are your top 3 duties. Well, people have done it. That's very interesting. They would be very similar to the top 3 in Australia. Fiduciary duty, the overarching, care and diligence in your behaviour, exercising good governance. Interesting, a few people are getting a few more extra votes. Fiduciary, financial oversight, good. It's changing as we speak. I better say nothing and let you vote. I'm influencing it. Okay, look, there's no magic bullet, no right answer to that. There is going to be, in this room and in every room of directors anywhere around the world, a difference of opinion on what the weighting of those responsibilities is. But the top 4 or 5 are going to be reasonably common. So where are we? Can we see that one up on this screen, which is where they've got me? Yep. Fiduciary duty, good governance, financial oversight, care and diligence. Avoiding conflict's got a small number of supporters, but I'm not surprised by that. They are the big picture director responsibilities. Now, can we take the second Slido question? Okay. On Malaysian boards, now this is a more subtle question. Which style is dominant? Is it rules or relationships? And so you've got to pair the two together. Which two do you think is dominant in Malaysia? At the moment, I don't know how many people have voted, relationships and centralised power. Oh no, the votes are coming in. Well, interesting from that's supporting some of the theory about the way boards in Malaysia work. That is that relationships are more important than rules. Rules have scored quite low in the pairings, and then there's a difference of opinion between centralised power in the board or sharing power. But it's interesting that the second and third ones are very close. But a dominant group, more than 50% saying relationships and centralised power is the dominant mode of the way boards balance things in Malaysia. It's important insight. Now that's just one part of the work of the people who are writing about the culture of boards. And I want to share one with you. This will keep changing, but I think we've got the top line result. And I'm glad I'm not calling a federal election because, I'd be calling the numbers too early. Let's move on. I'm conscious of time. Now, there's a wonderful Canadian writer called, and I forgot it on the screen, yes I have, Luciara Narden. Now, this is a while ago, but she was very, very clear. Some of the people who've written about this subject since haven't been as clear. And she said there are cultural dimensions, 5 of them, which are dominant right across the world, and companies tend to be one way or the other, and there are scale anchors, she called it. So in terms of the relationship with the environment, there are some companies and countries who are determined to master the environment, what I would call the bulldozer mentality. We don't give a damn about the environment, we send in the bulldozers and the chainsaws. And there are others who consciously try to work in harmony with the environment. And a very good example of that is the Scandinavians, who for years have had a very, very strong philosophy of living and working with the environment. In the social organisations, another measure when you can look at companies and countries, some are very individualistic and some are collectivist. Now the theory is that in Malaysia, you would be more collectivist rather than individual. In Australia and in the US, definitely individualistic. And people think and believe in their own narrow personal framework. About power distributed in the country and in the company, well, it's either hierarchical or it's egalitarian. I come from Australia in one that likes to think it's egalitarian, but the reality is we're becoming more hierarchic, which is a point I'll come to in a minute. Going back to that rules point, some are rules-based, some are relationship-based. The last one, time orientation, is very interesting, and I'll explain the 2 words. Monochronic means those people who focus just on one task. You've worked with them. You may have someone sitting beside you who's just that type of person. And you admire them because they are single-minded in their purpose. They just get it done. There are other people who, quite dramatically, they are what's called polychronic. They can multitask. And some companies are like that too. They can move, they can change, yep, we can do that, yes, we can do that, yes, we can do that, and they manage to deliver. They will probably be the survivors. The monochronic who are brilliant at one thing but not much else, they probably won't. So these insights are not just the way your board works, the way your management team works, but they may also offer some insights into how your company may succeed over time. Now, I'm not prepared to say that any of these are better or best, even worse, but they're indicators. And they're just a tool to think about when you're looking at really good board or management relationships. Let me move on. Now, Nardon has taken these cultural factors and applied them to countries. This looks very, very complex, and I'm going to ask you to do something on Slido in a minute. Now, if there is a plus next to it, it means it's a very strong cultural factor. If it's not, it's just there. So if you look at Malaysia, as far as the environment is concerned, she's saying that Malaysia is more living in harmony with its environment. I don't know whether that's 100% true. Collectivist plus, so that's a strong cultural ranking. Hierarchical, strongly again. Relationship-based, strongly. And polychronic, managing multiple issues. If you look at Australia, by contrast, we're strong on the mastery of the environment, and our environmental record would say that. It's not one that I'm proud of. Very individualist, as I said, egalitarian about power, rule-based, and monochronic. You don't find many Australian companies who can do, or individuals who are good at the multitasking. Now, we've drawn, many of you will understand and have insights for cultural reasons into the Chinese approach, and not surprisingly strongly collectivist, strongly hierarchical. And we're also in this room because many of you will work in companies that are working in Singapore or be part of Singapore boards. So again, they're slightly different and they're not the same as Malaysia, but it's an insight. I'm not saying it's an answer. All of these things are just tools to govern your insights into the boards and that you work on and the countries where they're working. That's all it is. So one little Slido question. Can we go to the next Slido question, please? Question 3. Okay. That's gone on a little bit. Can we take that one down for the moment? Because I want to explain what that is. People won't know. Can we take that Slido question down? Thank you very much. Okay. Now, while we've got this one up, and we won't necessarily use the Slido question, can I just have a show of hands? How many people think that ranking or that scoring for Malaysia is about right? I'm not saying perfect, about right, from the way I've explained it. Let's have a look. That's about a third to 40% of the people in the room. How many people think it's wrong? It just doesn't fit with your experience of Malaysia. Very small number. So that's very interesting. So even though Luciara Nardon did that research and published her findings 14 years ago nearly, it's still not bad. I mean, and I think the Australian one is pretty right. I'd argue the toss around a couple of them, but it's a guide. So let's move on. I want to make sure that you've got time to discuss the case study at the end. Okay, so if I move on, this is the heart of the 5-star relationship. What do practicing directors think is a 5-star relationship? Now, what I did, I could have sat down and said, well, let me think about the boards that I've been on where I've been a CEO or a chair or a director, and but I thought, no, I must go outside myself. So I interviewed a group of CEOs, chairs and directors. Now, I have to say that they were from smaller companies. One of them was a startup that's 5 years old. One is a well-established company, 40 to 50 years old. It's about 1.5 billion Australian dollars under management, a financial services company. And the third one was a mid-stage educational startup. Mid-stage in the sense that it's been around for 10 years. So I asked those individuals, what do they think is needed for a 5-star relationship? Because their experience is broader and I got more diversity. Well, the CEOs were very clear. And for, you think about the themes of this conference, trust and mutual respect they wanted from the directors, from the board. They expected maturity in the dealings. Remember, this is CEOs. They wanted clear accountability. They accepted that. They wanted support and guidance. And they wanted the fact that the board said, short-term challenge, but here's the long-term. They wanted both points of view. I want to tell you a little story that when I first was appointed to a CEO of a UK company some years ago, and it was the first meeting with the board, a very big board, and a very cranky Scottish female academic director came up to me and said, literally reached over the table and pounded the pad of paper in front of me like that and said, "Alan, I'll work with you, but," she said, "I want you to know that my real purpose is to hold your feet to the fire of accountability." And you know, she never stopped for 5 years. And for me, it didn't feel like a fire, it felt like a blowtorch. But that was her role. I got it for 5 years. And there are people on boards who do that. But you know, these things happen. And I survived. Now, if we ask management are very interesting. They're not dramatically different from the CEO. Managers say, we want access to directors. So if you are aloof, if you are disengaged from the management team as a director, you are probably not satisfying their expectations. They want face-to-face engagement, not email, not text messages or WhatsApp, face-to-face. They want very clear expectations. Remember that earlier mantra, no surprises? Management don't want to be surprised, something coming out of left field either. They want you to share your experiences. Most management know that boards collectively have a huge depth and breadth of experience in business challenges, in strategic issues, in markets that they've never experienced. But they want you to be prepared to sit down and talk about it. Not in a condescending way, just as fellow professionals. And that, it seems to me, is a very normal and contemporary insight into managers. Now, directors, well, they're different again. Because I live and breathe that because I'm one. Mutual trust and respect, almost the first thing they mentioned. They expect mutual trust and respect between directors and management, but also intra-board, between directors. Now, how many boards are you on which are factionalised? You have no internal trust and respect. How on earth can you demonstrate a 5-star relationship with management when you are disagreeing amongst yourselves? Fatal. Directors also said, not surprisingly, management accountability. They wanted the debates within the board to be robust. That is, not stage managed by the chair or the CEO. And when they were getting stage managed, you know what a stage managed debate's like. You just get given 3 minutes to say yes to something, and yet there are a lot of issues you want to draw out. Again, the directors talked about no surprises. They said that's the key to trust. If management takes us into their confidence, tells us something's gone wrong, and there is no surprise, then trust is strong. I've talked to you about the papers and the excessive papers that have padding. What directors are saying is make sure that the issue we need to debate and decide is clear. Whether it's a one-page summary up front which highlights what the issue is and this is what you need to decide, but don't pad it out in order to try and confuse us. And certainly I'm one of those directors who can make myself very unpopular by saying this paper was a waste of 35 minutes of reading because it didn't get to the issue. You've all read them. The question is whether you're prepared to call it out. Now, and the other thing about directors all said, we want to work with management that's prepared to ask for guidance. And management often doesn't because you know what it is? It's an ego thing. If management has to ask the board for guidance, sometimes they feel it's saying, I'm weak, I'm inadequate, I should know that. It's rubbish. No one can know everything. No director, no manager, no CEO, no chair. Humility comes from being prepared to ask and say, I don't know, that's new, that's fresh. Who can we ask? Who can we get good information from? Because ultimately you try to make evidence-based decisions, the best evidence-based decisions. So let's move on. Now, this is a really interesting concept which emerged. All board and management were aware of the respective roles. They knew what their jobs were. You've seen it from what the feedback. But they wanted challenge. The board had to be engaged, not aloof. And the assumption is that each side will push and pull. Now we see why have we got the physiotherapy band? Because it's the symbol of constructive tension. One side pushes, the other side pulls, or it pulls back. The board and management are in a state of constructive tension. But guess what's in the middle of this blue band? It's dragging both of them back to the core purpose, the strategy of the business. So constructive tension is not just about balance, it's about keeping you focused on a common direction. That's one of the elements of a 5-star relationship. So if it worked, see, just showing the strength of that constructive tension. Okay, let's move on. What did chairs think? Now, the chairs I was interviewing were probably a little older. I'd say the average age was 50. They were more senior. Most of them had been chairs for some years. And they were more hierarchical. They were I suppose they were probably old school, if I put it that way. They wanted management. They said management has to earn trust. They don't get it. Important point. Secondly, they said management has to show consistently that it can execute the strategy we've agreed with the resources we've given them, or it can exceed strategy. The chairs said there are lots of things inside this business and the business of our board where we personally have to lead, because we've got new directors who are a little bit shy, they're lacking in confidence, they're not prepared to challenge the CEO, who is a very dominant, outspoken individual. So they said, we will lead the process of challenging management. We will do that on behalf of the board. Interesting. And they kept saying management accountability is very important. Now, one of the things that happens in the best families, in the best boards, is conflict. And the problem is not if it occurs, because it will, but the problem is how do you resolve it? And where will you finish when you've resolved it? Will you be factionalised? Will you have had directors walk out? Will you have had management going off in a sulk to the pub? All of these things are possible. But you've got to, if you're really serious about a 5-star relationship and you want that board to be going on solidly into the future, you've got to address this issue. Not surprisingly, when we talked to the CEOs, and there was a very interesting difference with them. They said, we want an open and transparent discussion when the problem, and this was any conflict. The conflict could be we've got the wrong strategy. We entered this market and we just didn't know about cultural factors and we're burning cash, we've got to get out of that market. How do we get out without burning the reputation of the company? It's a common problem for companies that go global. So they wanted that to be transparent, not he said this and he was wrong and therefore it's all a fundamental mistake. Evidence-based decisions. Now that's also up to the CEO and management. Put the evidence on the table so the board can discuss it, the board can evaluate it. We're all sensible, balanced individuals. The other thing which came from the CEOs was they didn't want the board to engage in gossip or get feedback from junior members of staff who are disgruntled and then bring that to the board. That was just undermining the nature of the relationship and it was unacceptable. One thing which they said, which I was really surprised about, and I asked them and they said, oh, no, we would like, I think it was what they would like. They said, why can't we bring the management team with the board together and workshop a solution? Now, interestingly, that came from the CEO of a startup, because that's the sort of culture that she would have in her business. And I wasn't surprised to hear it, but the other companies would not have tolerated that. No, this is the board's right to resolve that. So there's an interesting tension, an alternative way of resolving conflict. I'm not sure how well it would work, but it'd certainly be interesting to try. I think you should keep an open mind. Now, there are a couple of concerns I have, having lived through boards that have tried to deal with conflicts. It depends on the nature of the issue. If it's an issue about business strategy, if it's an element of your business plan that has failed, and it's sort of objective because it's about money and markets and people, that's one sort of issue. But boards have to deal with, and companies have to deal with issues that are not that clean cut. Sometimes it might be unsavoury issues like sexual harassment by a senior member of staff, corruption, fraudulent behaviour by senior people. Now, they are messy, but they are the substance of conflict. I've lived through them and they're never easy to solve. So my second blue point there is there could be legal reasons for privacy or secrecy. You may start out and say, look, we want the board and management to be at one. We would like to have an open discussion. And then your corporate counsel or your external lawyer says, under no circumstances, you cannot do anything other than shut this down, deal with it properly. There are so many legal ramifications. I mean, we've all received that legal advice, and you think, okay, my instinct is to be open, but I'm not going to back off from that advice. Legal advice is always prudent, and I'm always worried about companies and boards that run to lawyers too often, and I usually speak out against it. If I looked at on the number of cases where I've spoke out and said, yes, let's go to lawyers, and sometimes when I've said, no, let's solve it as far as we can ourselves. And it's not just the cost, it's the complication and the delay. I want to resolve issues and move on and focus on the forward look rather than solving problems that occurred yesterday. But I acknowledge sometimes I've been wrong. So the other thing is, take care to protect the organisation's reputation, because any of the big conflicts are reputation damaging. And I want to tell you a quick short story about something that happened in Sydney, near where I live. It's almost yesterday. I live in Sydney in an area of apartment blocks down near the harbour, slightly to the west of the Harbour Bridge. And a multinational building management company managed all the buildings. They had a building manager who was a crook, but he was not found. He was clever. Let me tell you this, because this goes to the heart of reputation. He had got a job with false qualifications. Even though they were a multinational, with multinational HR, they didn't pick it up. He was appointed to be building manager of a high prestige, very expensive harbourfront apartment block. He managed all the maintenance, all the tradesmen, etc. He emptied out a wastewater tank and made an illegal kitchen and bathroom and freezer room. It's a very big tank that no one knew about. He had tradesmen come in out of hours and they got in and built this thing. He accessed the closed circuit TV and he knew how to switch it on and switch it off, so that if he was up to anything, no one could pick it up on the security cameras. They thought it was a glitch in the system. And he ran a drug den out of that multi-storey building on Sydney Harbour, distributed drugs. When people were making deliveries, he turned off the CCTV. When the delivery was over, he turned it back on again. Security thought, oh, gee, funny thing, it must be a lightning strike. The cameras have gone out. No one investigated. Then the story broke because he got greedy and he started to break into the storage cabinets of some of the owners. And that's when the owners called the police and they started investigating, and his girlfriend ran. The police thought that was a bit suspicious, so they chased her and they got her back. But there were two things. Terrible management mistakes. Three things. Firstly, he gained his job with a qualification that did not exist. It did not exist. He claimed an international qualification in building management that was phony. They should have known. Secondly, he bought an apartment, multi-million-dollar apartment, in that building. Didn't someone in HR say, hang on a minute, we know how much he's paid. How could he afford that? They didn't even ask the question. Thirdly, he drove a very, very fancy sports car. Third clue, expenditure exceeds income. Now, anyone who's done forensic work on fraud will say, hang on, I can hear all the alarm bells going. They're practically deafening me. The company did nothing. So then when it was exposed, what did they do? Here's the reputation issue. They said, our reputation is really strong. We're a listed company on the stock exchange. The owners don't want the value of their apartments to drop. We'll shut it down. Fat chance. So there was this huge conflict, and they tried to shut it down, and it took over in a social media firestorm. And within 24 hours, the television cameras were on the doorstep of the company, of the building. It was across the city. So there's a very important lesson for everyone. If you think in the 21st century, in an era of social media, that you can shut down a conflict or a crisis and it won't come back and bite you, you're kidding yourself. Start from the assumption that if you've got a conflict or a crisis happening in your board, it will leak out, and build a strategy on how to deal with that. I can't be stronger on that one than saying that. I want to ask you just can we go to a Slido question? It should be number 5. Given what I've been talking about, I want you to, this is one which is, I'll just ask for suggestions from the floor. You've heard from Australian CEOs, directors and chairs about what's unique and what's special in the sorts of relationships they want. But I think there might be something different in Malaysia. I don't know what it is because I don't live and work in your environment. I have, but not on a board. So just have a quick chat. I can give you about 3 minutes, people near you, and then let me know, just with a show of hands, we'll see what sorts of issues you would raise that are not, if we go back, remember, go back, directors said they wanted these things: mutual trust, accountability, robust debates, no surprises, good papers. Then there was a constructive tension, and the chairs wanted earning trust, management demonstrates it exceeds strategy, chairs to lead. What else is there in Malaysia? What else is there? Is there some special factor that you think? There may not be, and I could be kidding myself, but I'd like to know. Because if you've got something special, it could be really useful in the chemistry of the board. Take a couple of minutes. Okay, got a couple of interesting suggestions. I'm not sure. The fourth one that's currently fourth, authenticity with courage without being subject to false harmony imposition. That's an interesting one. That's a very interesting one. That's talking about, hypocrisy, really. Political interference and patronage, I expected they would be mentioned as part of the way, well, let's be positive, part of the way the old Malaysian corporate culture worked. We're being positive here today. It's going to improve, guys. I love that phrase, hidden hands behind the board. Now, that's terrible. That's telling me that you think you're puppets. The hidden hand is coming up your back. Yeah, I mean, dealing with mandate from the top, that is top-down decision. The board just actually has to tick it. And that could be government, that could be senior stakeholders, etc. Yeah, and ego managers, I get that too. And favouritism/cronyism, I think we all know what that is. These are negative differences, a lot of them. Is there any one of those that we would think is a positive difference? We're getting more negatives. This wasn't my intention. I was looking for the positive one. Okay, I've been told. I've opened up Pandora's box, and I thought the next part was going to say close the box. Government appointments, yep. And non-independent independent directors. That is, independent directors who are independent in name only. We have those in Australia too. You know what? The answers to that question, I think ICDM needs to look at that. There's the subject of another session. How do we bring those things out into the open and talk about them? They're serious issues. I can't deal with them today. There isn't enough time, but they are serious issues. That is a potential hot topic for ICDM to have an education session. Or alternatively, do some research on it and then use the research to promote the debate, because people can be anonymous in research. I'll leave that to you. That would be interesting though. Let me move on, because I'm determined to get to the, we got more things coming up? Too low board fees, okay. I like this one. Do as I say, not as I do. Is the multiracial ethnic board, whoever said that, you don't have to put your hand up, but is that meant to be an impediment? That is a negative? Because it could be a positive. Sorry? So diversity, this is excessive diversity, or they're wanting more diversity? I see it as a positive. Someone's giving you a microphone, Christine. Still not.
No, I say it's positive because I think it's diversity, so hence...
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
And that one's not enough diversity. Okay, that's right. Look, I didn't expect that array of that really was a Pandora's box, and thank you for whoever told me I'd open the lid. That wasn't my intention, but it was a good outcome. And I just go back, take out message, ICDM, here's your opportunity. There's a great course that could come from that. Make sure you save those comments. I want to move on because we have a busy day. And we've talked about conflict. And I want to ask you, if we go to the next Slido question, I'm hoping this isn't another Pandora's box, but we'll see. It's the question, question 6, what types of issues? Here we go. Have a think about that. What types of issues would require highly confidential treatment by the board? Remember what I said earlier about you have to rely on your lawyers. Sometimes you've got to keep it really tight. I'm not asking for a specific scandal. There are many we could refer to. We're being really well behaved today. We won't raise those. But what type of issue? Make it a bit more generic. Oh, we're responding. Removal of CEO. It's a very good one. Yeah. Some HR issues. Yep, definitely. Renewing the CEO's contract. Yep. Yep. Oh, that whistleblowing on top management. Yep. And sexual harassment by the CEO. In fact, I had, unfortunately, it wasn't me, but I was on the board, direct experience of that, and the board found that one of the most difficult issues to confront because he denied it and we thought we had evidence. So we actually had to get rid of him on other grounds. That can be very difficult. Also, hierarchical oligopoly is untouchable. I like that one. That can almost relate to the previous one. That came out of Pandora's box, I can see that. Involving a politician, yep. Oh, related party contracts, yep. Oh, yes, family feud for family-run companies. There's a family construction business in Sydney that has had the two brothers who are the principals in court for 10 years, suing each other. They have not laid one brick because they've spent their whole time briefing lawyers and fighting in court. They've just dissipated the family wealth because this is a feud that each one of them wants to win. I wouldn't want to be on their boards. Integrity issues, I'm assuming that's of the general manager. Yeah, okay. Look, you're right. All of those, I'm pleased by that diversity because that's telling me that you've got a good handle on those things that you need to keep tight. And all of those have got a lot of downsides if they became public or they became outside the circle of people who should know. One of those we'll come back to in the case study. I'd now like to, before we move on to the case study, and we may have some time for questions at the end, I want to move to the special, I've said all this stuff, this one, the special CEO and chair relationship. Now, interestingly, even the directors I interviewed said, if you don't get this right, the company will not succeed. And this is from both sides. This is not saying the chair has to make sure the CEO behaves. The CEO and the chair have got to be simpatico. This has got to be a relationship that works. People use phrases like, this is the key. This is the most important relationship around our board table. If it doesn't work, forget it. Critical foundation of 5-star relationship. It needs frequent communication. So if the chairman says, well, I go and have a chat to the CEO once a month, or I have a phone call, not going to cut the mustard. It will not be good enough. It's like a good marriage. And I say that not being facetious. Many people in this room will be married, and I won't ask for your value judgment on whether it's a good or a bad one, but you know that if you neglect the frequent communication, it will deteriorate. Any relationship is like that. Now, the chairs disagreed on some of this stuff. The CEOs wanted equality. They said, I want equality with the chairman. I don't want a master-servant relationship. I don't want the chairman speaking down to me. That's fine. The chairman said, but we're not equal. We have the hire and fire responsibility over that CEO. So we can never be truly equal, because how do you change that relationship? That's the nature of the relationship. But the CEO said, we want wise counsel. We want the chair to be able to sit down with us and look at the broad picture of issues that we're facing and offer some wisdom and experience. Now, most chairs would say, yeah, we agree. They want some coaching, specific support. They want availability and they want engagement. So many of them said, I want a chair who is genuinely engaged in our business. It's not just a job for them. And the CEO said, look, I live this job 24/7. I expect my chair not to be 24/7, but a good slab of the time that I can call on them. Now, I want to just add a qualifier on some coaching, because one of the chairs said, and I had quite a long discussion with him, he's only recently been appointed. He said, I think I'll be a mentor to the CEO. And I said, no, I don't think that's appropriate. I said, a good mentor should be outside the business so they can offer independent advice to the CEO. That is not your role. You can coach, you can counsel, but give them an independent mentor. And there's a long subject around that, but I have a huge philosophical commitment to the importance of boards giving, that is paying for, a mentor to the CEO. And those organisations who have done it, it helps the CEO enormously to have that independent source of profound advice on the issues facing them in their role as a CEO. But it's not the chair. Now, the chairs said, they were a bit blunt, weren't they? Look at the first point. They said, if it isn't working, one of them must go. Either you change the chair or you change the CEO. But you cannot have a dysfunctional chair-CEO relationship. The longer you tolerate it, the more the company will suffer. It must be respectful and open. We get that. As I said earlier, there cannot be equals because the board recruits the CEO. The board and the chair do performance management of the CEO. They give them a rating. They offer suggestions on their professional development. That's not a relationship of equals. Two really nice phrases that I liked were these: that the chair helps the CEO navigate the board minefield. Now, you know what that means. You know that your colleague across the desk has got a particular personality type, and you understand it. You've worked with them for a few years. The CEO may not see that enough, and the chair should be able to guide them on how to do that. And it's a different way of expressing it is the second one. Help the CEO read the board. How do you read when the board's turning against you? How do you read it when the board's saying, no, we're just not sure? And the CEO just keeps pushing, and all it does is just means they're likely to say no. And that's where the chair can offer wise counsel and advice. And that's the subtlety. It's not in a textbook about the role of a chair. That's the nuance, the subtlety about the relationship that good 5-star relationships are about. And I can't give you that. I can't tell you to do a course. I can alert you to it. I can build your awareness, but you've got to build it. No one else can do it. Okay. I'm going to get through this case study so we can finish on time. We may not have a discussion, but I'm happy to talk to people over coffee. Here's the case study. Redco, true story, changed names. Redco were a successful global financial services company, very good growth. However, very poor tactics by the CEO and questionable ethical practices. Very important, questionable ethical practices. The reputation was badly damaged in some markets and definitely with regulators. The board had no choice. They could not have the regulators saying the CEO was dodgy. Literally, is what the regulators were saying. So they removed the CEO. They appointed a new CEO. His KPIs were very simple. Stabilise the business, get back to the growth that we had before, and this was global business, re-establish the reputation with customers, markets, journalists and regulators. broad spectrum, and in some ways, the strongest weighting of the KPIs was the last one, because that board were quite intelligent and they recognised that without reputation they had no growth. So they focused the CEO on that. 18 months later, growth was accelerating, the regulators and markets were positive, the management team were restructured, so it got rid of some of the dead wood and the cause of some of the ethical problems, though the previous CEO was the biggest cause. The CEO was given a 4 out of 5 rating on performance, but, here's where it starts to get unravelled. The new chair was envious of the travel and power enjoyed by the CEO and wanted the CEO's job. So, progressively undermines the CEO, talks to the regulators and say, oh, well, he won't stay long. You understand he really wants to go back to his previous role. Excuses like his wife doesn't like this company. All sorts of subtle undermining with the regulators. But what he said was, I'll be the white knight. I'll replace him. The company will be fine. But the chair made a mistake. He also briefed a leading financial journalist, thinking the journalist might write a story which would increase the momentum and force the CEO out. But the journalist actually respected corporate governance, was horrified and told the CEO. The CEO checked with the regulators, discovered what the chairman was up to, and then spoke to several senior board members without the chair. Here's the dilemma. Here's what you need to discuss with your peers around you. What does the board do? What are the outcomes of this case study? True life story. Can we go to the Slido question that accompanies this? Because there are options. Here we go. You may not want to discuss it because you may have views straight away. Slido, here we go. First option, CEO considers his position untenable and resigns. Can't stand it, I'm not going to cop this. The chair resigns. That is, I'm caught out, I've got to go. The chair apologises and retains his role. And the top one, the board intervenes and resolves the issue in a different way. It's not one of the others. Take a minute. I want to see some more votes on this one. It's interesting to see how the numbers flow. You're definitely right, the CEO did not resign. Conference organisers are going to actually have me shot, so I better actually give you the outcome. We could discuss this, leave the voting to run, but I think, in fairness, I should tell you what the outcome was. What happened was the board asked the chairman to stand aside. There is, quote, unquote, there is sufficient doubt about your behaviour, you must stand aside as chairman. We are mounting an independent inquiry. Who did they get to do it? They got the independent member on their remuneration committee. So who knew the company, knew the organisation, knew the CEO and the chair, but was independent, not on the board. And he was told he had 14 days to do an inquiry. In 14 days, he actually reported in 12. And this was the outcome. They said the chairman can stay on in his role till the next AGM. We are giving him the right to preserve face and pride and not damage the organisation by, putting a bomb under the chairman. So they were conscious of external reputation. However, the chairman is to have no contact, no oversight with the CEO. And they appointed an executive board of 3, the deputy chairman and 2 other senior directors, and they were the 3 who worked closely with the CEO for the balance of the other chairman's term. After the AGM, new chairman, they encouraged the old chairman to get off the board ASAP. Clean it out. So the board, in that case, I think, deserve massive credit. They protected the reputation of the company. They held on to a good CEO who went on to be even better. They got rid of someone who was like a cancer in the board. I mean, that sort of untrustworthy behaviour, undermining a CEO that had been jointly agreed by the board, that's just not acceptable. So the board showed great wisdom. And I tell you that story because boards can, working collaboratively, come up with very good left field solutions with the right sort of guidance. And the guidance in that case was that the people who were below the chair, the deputy chair and a couple of the senior directors, they had the wisdom to resolve it. And that also tells you about succession planning, because if they didn't have a good deputy chair, they might not have resolved it. The deputy chair was strong and ultimately became a good chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the organisers are going to rip me off the stage shortly. I'd just like to make some concluding comments. Thank you for your attention and your participation, and I appreciate you playing the game with Slido, which keeps our minds active. I wish I could give you the magic bullet to creating and maintaining a 5-star relationship between board and management. There is no magic bullet. I hope I've given you some of the signals. That is, it's a board chemistry matter, and you've got to work at it like any good relationship. You do need to have defined boundaries. You do need to have trust and respect. You do need to have trust and agility. You do need open communications. You need an ethical chair, and you need that constructive tension. Remember the rubber band? That constructive tension that brings you back to the core purpose. These are some of the elements which will, I hope, eventually create a 5-star relationship, and on Trivago you'll get 5 stars too. Thank you very much.